I was actually working in executive capacity. He's not working for a citizen anymore. So I was just there to take notes and to provide that information to her.
We have hotel vouchers, but they come and go with funding, and then who has them. So that's a complicated system. Maybe we need like an alert system. Who has hotel vouchers? Something like that. That's what they're doing in the West Valley. They have their own resource system right now until the county sort of comes up to help people find places. So this is more like the flow of people through the whole process. On the street, we need the street outreach. We got to have somewhere safe to stabilize them and shelter. Then we move into the programs and navigate into services. And then we have like interim housing, and that's going on here. We have a lot of that right now, but like this part is where I think we're having issues. We have the wellness center as something to think about as like where to focus our energies, like some place that can take care of a lot of these issues. They describe the wellness center in Victorville as a low barrier emergency shelter, recuperative care, medical clinic, interim housing, and wraparound support services. So a question to ask them is like, well, if someone's on the street, can they come to your wellness center that night? Well, I know they can't if they're not from Victorville because they limit it to Victorville, but that's something we need to think about. Like, they have more resources. Maybe we have to wrap that shelter into what we're designing. Now, we just talked about in scale and in character. There's certain things where we want to keep things small in scale and in character in the community, but then there's things that just have to be a larger scale. So this might be the larger scale solution. So this is all like what we need to focus in on so we know what we're ready for it when the grants come along. This is the issue. We have the grants. The grants come up for like 2 months, and you have to be ready. You know, when that grant notice of funding comes out, availability, you have to be ready with what you want to do. And that's what we're lacking, is that community decision of what we want, and we have the details ready to go for the funding. Actually, let me just run through.
I just wanted
Okay.
to you need to qualify which grant you're talking about, because if it's something like nationwide, you might see the money within a month or two.
Yeah.
If you're talking about county
Yeah.
money, you may not see it for another year.
Yeah, that's all why all the universes I was describing of, you know, you have to understand the universe that you're operating in and how it comes through. Plus the grants are coming and going. So then, you know, you have them sort of stabilize, and then the next thing is, you know, the housing navigation. So the launch pad period, where you're finding them the housing, and, you know, they're finding the locations, you're finding the roommates, you know, all that process. But then some people aren't ready for complete independence. Some need the permanent supportive housing, and that's where a lot of the grants are flowing into this permanent supportive housing stage. That's where the money's going right now. So that's what you have to be aware of. Okay, we need to work on this wellness center, but the money's through permanent supportive housing. You know, it's a business. You have to look at it like a business, an entrepreneurial business of how can we get that we need with the funding that's available, and how does it work for the community. But anyway, so there's that whole aspect. And then of course, once they're in their home, a lot of folks need that continued oversight for a little while at least, to get them sort of trained up to being in the home. It's a big change. I know personally, from being outside, living outside, physically open space, to going into an interior space. It's a physical, mental thing you have to overcome. And as Jen was saying, there's like phases that go on. A lot of people, once they come from the outside environment to the inside environment, do strange things. Like, oh, I'm cold. Let me light that fire by my bed. You know, just, you know, it's a process. So we need to have that oversight, and that's a lot of what all this is about. So anyways, that's the flow through. We're not doing that right now. I'm just letting you know that that's something you have to think about, and we will think about more and have in your mind. So today, which don't have a huge amount of time, is looking at it by populations. We've got, and this is because the grants tend to be very, very specific to the population ages. So we've got the social services, and half the time I don't even know what word to use, but this is like the services of food and, you know, clothing and all that, and they have a place that they go to for the services. So Reach Out, for example, you guys have a lot of these services with the Narcan and such, and you have a place for the services, which is by the bank, but there's no housing attached to it, right? Tay's who I want to start with, because that's kind of the easiest in my mind, because I know the most about it. But we have the minors. I'm learning there's a whole gap here that we just really discussed, that it came up again at the grant writing workshop of the under 18s. You can't house under 18s minors with the Tay Center. There's all this funding here for the youth, but there's this giant gap for unaccompanied minors. And guess what? They're friends with each other. 18-year-olds hang out with 17-year-olds. They don't want to be separated. So there's issues there. Then of course we have the families, and we've got Wayne and MUSD, but the minimal housing really for families. So this is what I want to just try and map out. Pets is another issue, because that affects the housing decisions as well. Domestic violence is a huge thing, and that goes across the different populations. But then we go back into the single women. Well, there's single women, then there's pregnant women, right? Two different things as well, in terms of where they go for services and housing. Couples, this is what I found out on the point in time count. A lot of the couples want to stay together, and the situation I had with my family, we got it all worked out, but it was I'm not going to be separated from my pets. I'm not going to be separated from my husband. I'll live in the wash, thank you very much, which we didn't have to do. But I'm just saying, that was in the, what are we going to do here? But people that have to make that choice, I would stick with my boyfriend instead of going to a shelter, So that's an issue. There's not much for couples. Single men, these guys I feel are kind of pushed a little bit to the side, everyone's worrying the women and all these things, so that also there's a gap there, but we do have some resources here for that. And seniors, another line of accounting and of grants and such. And veterans, of course, we got programs. That's the one thing that's working really well in the county is the veterans case conferencing. So that is one thing that's really good with case conferencing. And then we move into addiction, mental health, justice involved, and the violent offenders, I have no idea where they go because they're not allowed in most of the housing. Yeah. So anyway, so what I wanted you guys to do, I'm going to give you pens. So the pen part is what we have, okay? And if we get to it, the post-it notes is what we want or what we need. So first it's laying it out. So for Tay is youth, right? So I might have you want to come do this?